Nick?
Agreed.
Hi, Director Padilla. Welcome.
Hello there.
We are broadcasting right now just so I can pull people over from the attendees.
Hello, Nick.
Hey, Monica.
Welcome, welcome. Member Lou and should I call it Member Carr or Member Ratia? Which do you prefer?
Ratia, Member Ratia. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Adrian, have you been in touch with Kate?
I have not. I sent an invite, but I've not heard back from her.
Okay, the only reason I was wondering is we know that Lorraine's going to join as the alternate for Ernie, who's not going to be here. But for the new folks, we're taking the oath first. And so I didn't know if she was going to be here as the alternate to take the oath and then listen in. I don't know.
Yes, I sent everyone invites.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
And just so the folks on the call know, we are actually recording right now. So starting a little early so Adrian can get folks over from the other side and bring them in.
When you say the other side, what are you referring to?
Well, we're all panelists, Cynthia, and public. There are two different links that go out, and sometimes people click on the one that doesn't get them directly here. And so Adrian has to move them over from that side to over to here.
Okay.
So actually, one of the things I was just realizing is by the end of today, well, we're going to have 6, 7, 8 actual members now.
Yeah. Yes,
So quorum is what, 5?
Yeah.
Okay. So we actually have a quorum now. Looks like we have 6. I'm going to give it another 1 minute to have folks show up, and then I'm going to officially start us off.
Great.
Mary, before we start, can you email me your phone number, please?
Sure, I can just give it to you.
Okay. Why don't you just email it to me because I'm walking now, when you have a chance. Thank you.
Sure. And Cynthia, I'm going to apologize in advance because I didn't see until I read the notes about your desire to get a discussion this month about a program on bill payments. So that one didn't make it into this month's, and I apologize profusely for that. But I'll get it on next month.
That's fine. That's, yeah, that wasn't the reason why I asked you for it, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So I am going to call the East Bay Community Energy Community Advisory Committee meeting on Monday, May 17th at 6 p.m. I'm going to open us up. Adrian, can you please do roll call?
Yes. Member Eldridge. Member Eldridge. Member Laundrie.
Present.
Member Padilla. Member Padilla.
Here.
Member Pacheco. Member Pacheco. Alternate Souza, representing EBCE Service Area Central. Is that it here? Yep.
No, I don't see her.
Okay. Member Liu, representing EBCE Service Area East.
Present.
Member Mutzenberg, representing San Joaquin Valley County, excuse me.
Here.
Member, Vice Chair Frank
Here.
and Chair Sutter.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Adrian. So item C2 is oath of office for our new CAC members. I'm very pleased to welcome folks who—
Mary, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt. Should we note that member Eldred has arrived?
Yeah. Adrian,
Great.
please note that Anna Olivia's showed up.
Great.
Anyway, I'm pleased that to have the folks that were officially brought in from the board last month at this month's meeting. I think that we've got 5 that are here, except for I don't see Lorraine, but it looks like the other 4 are here for the oath. And then we're looking forward to perhaps having a few more next month. So, Adrian?
Great. Our new CAC members, I see here Member Liu, Member Ratia, alternate Member Ratia, Member Mutzenberg, alternate Duggan. If you could repeat after me. I, your name.
I,
I, Liu.
Ratia,
Okay.
I, William Mutzenberg.
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will
that I will
support
faithfully
Or defend the Constitution of the United States.
and of the state of California
and of the
and of the state of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
against
all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will
bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California.
To the
Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of California.
That I take this obligation freely
And I
take
take
This
this
obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
without
without any
reservation
reservations or purpose of evasion.
explanation,
And that I will well and faithfully
that I will
Well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
discharge the
the duties upon
duties
which I'm about to enter.
Great, thank you. Congratulations.
Great. Thank you all and welcome. And Adrian, I'm pretty sure that Mickey Lorraine is showing as an attendee. So I think we have to move her over, and unfortunately she's going to need to take the oath by herself. She's got her hand raised, and I'm pretty sure that's Lorraine is Mickey.
I'm
Welcome.
here and I did take the oath. I was following along and driving. I'm a little late coming back. Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yeah, but
I'm
unfortunately,
going to start my video. I'm driving
that's all
and I
right.
was following along.
Hear you.
Sorry.
We didn't hear you, Mickey. That and it wasn't your fault. You weren't in as a panelist. You were as an attendee, and we couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
that's all
Okay.
right.
I'll take it later by myself.
Actually, I think because we're going to use you as a member, I'd like to have you go ahead and just do it right now. Because Ernie's not here, so you're filling in for Ernie tonight.
Okay. Member says, are you ready?
Nikki, are you there?
I think you might be driving and
Yep. Well, we'll figure this out as we go. Actually, for tonight, we have no action items. It's all informational. So at some point, it's not going to matter for a quorum for us. But once she comes back on and we see that, let's go ahead and try and just fit that in.
great, will do.
And Priya is asking us, Priya, you are going to be on the consent calendar for the board on Wednesday. So tonight you can definitely listen in, but you're not official until after the board appoints. So there are at least 3 people that are on the consent calendar that I saw for Wednesday. And you could, like I said, you won't be official on the CAC until then. So unfortunately, you can definitely listen in, but not as a member of the CAC tonight.
My normal control to move her to panelist to an attendee is not here, and I'm afraid that if I remove her, I'll remove her from the meeting entirely.
Okay,
So
that's fine.
great.
All right, let's move on to item C3, public comment. Do we have any?
Yes. We do have one public comment from Alita Dupree, and I see hands are being raised now. So we'll go Alita Dupree, Vaughn, and Jessica Tovar. I am unmuting Alita Dupree now.
Thank you, Chair Mary Sutter and committee members. Alita Dupree, for the record, my pronouns are she and her. Always good to be back with you. And we're starting to get into the warmer months. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. I've been reading a lot about curtailment of renewable electricity. I read that in March that the California Independent System Operator had about 340 million kilowatt hours of renewable energy curtailed. And to put that in perspective, that's about 2 months worth of electricity to run the New York City subway. That's an awful lot of trains. And so as part of our efforts to improve and decarbonize our grid, we always have to ask ourselves, how can we get that? And it's easier said than done. How do we move it into our community? In March, there was a 5-minute period where the grid ran 92.5% renewable. But over the entire month, it was about 35% renewable. Obviously, you have a lot of peaks and valleys. So how do we get ourselves to the point of capturing that so it doesn't go to waste? Because if we're wasting renewable energy, then most likely fossil fuels are being burned. And we all know what that can do, and that's what we're trying to fight against. And in our community work, we also have to ask ourselves, how do we develop in the community, especially in an eye of equity? I believe in the building electrification and the electric vehicle charging, especially in rented facilities. It's It shouldn't be for people who happen to have a lot of money. It's definitely the kitchen electrification, building electrification is important, because I worked in kitchens years ago and there were a lot of gas stoves running. And I would like to know, is there a cigarette equivalent to the amount of emissions from gas cooking equipment that people are breathing in a kitchen? So I support electrification so people don't have to breathe that in. It costs in public health. So I ask that you continue your community work of building a cleaner, greener, and affordable electric system with equity in mind. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Alita.
I am recognizing Vaughn now.
Hello, this piggyback on kind of what Alita was pushing to about the curtailment. I brought this up several months ago, and the staff indicated that they expect this kind of curtailment at this time of the year when it's not that there's an awful lot of sun and wind and stuff like that in it, and there's no big air conditioner draw. So I think in 2019 that it was 1.2 gigawatts that were curtailed. Also, the only way it's ever going to get taken care of is if we have long duration storage. And since that technology is not mature yet, and the staff is amply aware of this, because it was in the last two slides of the webinar they had a couple weeks ago, bringing everybody up to speed, that until you get the penetration of long duration storage, you can't really have 100% recovery of the power that's done and maintain it either over the weeks or over the months or over the seasons. My point is that at this stage of the game, and Joel can back this up, the cities in the Tri-Valley, and I'm supposedly Oakland, are all doing their climate action plans. If, depending on the technology that might be needed, and the staff would probably know all the different kinds and have a favorite or not, but that's going to require some real estate someplace to put those storage, whether it's batteries or liquid air or green hydrogen tanks or whatever. And the placement of those, is it going to be 10, 5 megawatt or 5, 10 megawatts, is going to have to be strategically laid out throughout the region. Since the cities are doing their climate action plans, shouldn't they be alerted, if you haven't already, on setting aside some space in certain regions so that they're when the time comes and the technology is aware, and it's going to be like in 5 years, it's not that far away. You're going to need some space to put these storage spots. And if they don't know to preserve that space now, then they're going to have to scramble for it in the future. It would probably be better, now that they're making the climate action plans, to know to preserve 5 or 10 acres or whatever it's going to be. And I don't know, has the staff already done that? They seem to be ahead of the ball on quite the other things, and maybe you've already done it. But I didn't notice it in the discussions of the Pleasanton climate action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn.
Thank you. I'm recognizing Jessica Tovar now.
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And first of all, welcome to the new Community Advisory Committee folks. One of the things that we've been advocating for is the issue on utility debt, specifically the mass debt that has been accrued as a result of the pandemic and the shutdown that began March of last year. At the last board meeting, you heard about a dozen or so folks speak on that issue, about having our East Bay Community Energy take action to support folks in East Bay and Tracy that might be struggling right now with debt. So one of the things that we noted that other community choice programs are doing is, for example, since the shutdown, there has been enrollment into the CARE and FARA discount program, specifically from Clean Power SF, has increased their enrollment by 37% since March of 2020. Some community choice programs have issued bill credits for their CARE and FARA customers, as well as even small businesses. And such bill credits help at a time where, you know, a lot of folks have lost their jobs, for example, or have to prioritize keeping their home and buying groceries. Other community choice programs that have issued bill credits: Peninsula Clean Energy, Marin Clean Energy, Clean Power SF. Another suggestion of issuing bill credits to keep people in the AMP program so that at the end of 12 months, they can get forgiveness on the rest of their debt. And then, you know, we obviously want your support in our fight against, you know, getting debt forgiveness at the state and national level. But beyond COVID, we definitely need to create a shutoff prevention program, noting that this is an ongoing burden for folks. And we want to make sure that we are not leaving people in the dark. And I also want to add that the other ask is that there's a heavy investment in community resilience hubs, specifically with islandable solar and battery storage, so that we may have locations in our communities that have islandable power, because we are experiencing a lot of planned power shutoffs, and we're expected to do so for the next 10 years. So I appreciate your support and attention to these matters. Clean power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Adrian, I don't see any other, do we have anybody else?
We do not have, let me just check. There's no one else signed up to speak to public comment.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item C4, which is an approval of minutes from last month. Do I have from the folks who are actually here last month?
Mm-hmm. Motion to approve.
Second, this is Monica.
Any discussion? Hearing none, let's have a roll call of members. And for those of the members that are here, Joel, William, Mickey, well, Mickey, it sounds like you are back. You can abstain since you weren't here.
Great. Okay. Member Eldridge. Oh, sorry. Member Eldridge?
Yes.
Member Laundrie?
Yes, with the addition that Mary already said, to discuss the bill relief program in the June meeting.
Great. Okay, great. I'm making note of that, of as amended. Member Padilla?
Yes.
Member Pacheco? Member alternate Souza? Member Liu?
I'm abstaining.
Abstain.
Member Mutzenberg?
Abstain.
Vice Chair Front?
Yes.
And Chair Sutter?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. I would like to take my CAC chair report time, because I don't have much to say, to actually, since Mickey is back now, is to have her go through the oath. Mickey, can you hear us, and can you say, are you at a spot where you can actually take this oath at this point? She dropped off again. So my assumption, no, she's back as an attendee. Adrian.
Yes, hold on 1 second. All right.
All right, Mickey, we're trying.
Thank you, everybody. I just arrived home. My apologies.
That's all right. So let's go through the oath now. We're going to take my chair report on because I don't have anything to report today.
Yes. Member Souza, if you repeat after me. I, Member Souza,
Thank you, Souza.
do solemnly swear or affirm
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I support and believe in the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the United of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States,
Whatever you said.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
That I will bear allegiance to
the State of California,
the State of California,
excuse me, to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
and to the Constitution of the United States and California.
That I take this obligation freely,
That I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully
That I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Great, thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys.
All right. So we're going to move on to item C6. And Mickey, if you can mute yourself, maybe we won't hear some of the background noise. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to turn over a introduction of tonight's speaker to JP. But for those of you on the line, as you may be aware, Jane and I have been working on metrics initiative. We do not yet have a specific date for a public meeting, but we wanted to present information about how the city of Oakland moved forward to get to their equity metrics. And so we're really fortunate to have a city of Oakland staffer with us tonight to talk about their process and what they've come up with. JP?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So really happy to have Shayna on board as we continue to evaluate, the equity metrics and the metrics initiative that we've been working on. One of the things that we want to make sure we're leveraging is the great work that our cities have done. As one of the earlier public speakers mentioned, many of our cities have climate action plans. Those are actively being updated pretty continually. And many of those also have equity frameworks, as well as some of the statewide initiatives around transportation, energy efficiency, and electrification. And so the city of Oakland went through an extensive process around community feedback during their equitable climate action plan development. And we thought it would be helpful to have someone from the city of Oakland come and talk about that. So Shayna is managing, she's the climate coordinator and I think interim director of sustainability at City of Oakland, and is going to walk us through a presentation on what the City of Oakland did with their equitable climate action plan.
Great, thank you, JP. Wonderful, you have my slides up. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Oakland's, we call it the ECAP, our Equitable Climate Action Plan. You can go ahead. This is a plan that we developed over about 3 years with a tremendous amount of community engagement and I will talk about what is in the plan. I'll talk about the community engagement process, the process we use to develop our equity metrics, and a bit about how we see from the city side this kind of dovetailing with the work of East Bay Community Energy. And I'm gonna apologize for background noise. I have a husband practicing viola and kids in a bath in the other room. So I hope that's not distracting. So at a high level, this is kind of how we think of the ECAP. We, through this plan, addressed both what we call local emissions and life cycle emissions within our effort to stop climate change, right? So stopping climate change and adapting to climate change are the two things that we're kind of trying to tackle here simultaneously through this 10-year plan. And all of that is done within a deep umbrella of social, racial, and economic equity. So this is a very equity-driven plan. And that really reflects, I think, the strength of Oakland and the strength of Oaklanders, who for years have, really said, this is what we need to focus on first and foremost, not just the technical problem of climate change, but how climate change is impacting communities, frontline communities in particular, which I'll talk about that term in just a minute. How certain communities are affected first and foremost, how we're going to adapt over time, and how we really just center the experience of frontline Oaklanders in this work in terms of jobs, in terms of health, in terms of safety. The plan has 40 actions in it, and it is designed to achieve a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030. And that's relative to a 2005 baseline. You can go on to the next slide. Can you move on to that? Thanks. Okay, so I do want to focus on a couple of terms here. To whom the benefits are allocated in this critical climate work we're doing is absolutely critical. We need to have ways of measuring the impacts and parsing out not just the benefits of our work across Oakland or obviously the global community, but specifically the communities, like I said, that have been and are continuing increasingly to be impacted first and worst, and the communities who stand to gain the most from equitable climate action. So this is I won't read the quote unless you want me to. If the committee wants me to read quotes for people on the phone, I'm happy to, but otherwise I'll refrain. This is a direct quote from the ECAP.
You don't need to read it. This is available online, and folks typically, as near as I know, they call in. They're not often on the phone.
Okay.
It's available.
Okay, beautiful. So the couple of things that I just want to note here is that who you define as a frontline community, it's very intersectional. So you're looking at additive and sometimes exponential vulnerability depending on things like where you live, the color of your skin, your family's background. It also changes. Who is in a frontline community changes depending on what is the intervention that you're looking at. So for example, if you're looking at vehicle electrification, I've got a picture of a truck operator at the port there. If you're talking about vehicle electrification, truck operators are a frontline community. They are on the front lines of that shift. If you're talking about building electrification, you're going to be talking about, different groups of folks, people who are, especially living in small apartment buildings, who are deeply impacted by the fumes that might be coming from gas stoves and poorly ventilated older apartments. At the same time, if you're talking about, say, wildfire risk, when you're in the climate adaptation section of the plan, you are going to be talking about a lot of people who live up in the hills, who are on the front lines of where human settlement comes up against wild areas, as well as people all over Oakland who are more vulnerable respiratorily, right, from smoke. So you really do need to look at things at a very granular action by action, intervention by intervention basis when you're thinking about things from the point of view of frontline communities. And a note on the terminology also, we really heard loud and clear that terms like communities of concern and vulnerability those aren't really looked kindly upon, because it really feels very personal, and it feels kind of disempowering to a lot of people. And so the terminology that really rose up was who is on the front lines of this work, again, in terms of being impacted and needing and deserving of the greatest benefits from the work. We can go on. So another term that I wanted to focus on is just climate equity. And so again, this is a quote directly from the ECAP. And this is just how the city of Oakland defines and prioritizes not just climate action, but climate equity. And so it's about not only mitigating climate change in general, that is critical, but also and equally looking at eliminating the disparate harms from climate change. And so we're looking at, the determinants of well-being, regardless of identity, things like that. And all of this is stuff that I'm sure that you all talk about. But I think it's important to kind of look at the language and really think it through. And so again, this came out of a 3-year process of being very intentional about the language. And I'll probably say this a few times. We invite you to use any of this. This is not something that, Oakland, the city of Oakland or the people of Oakland, want to be proprietary. This, again, there were thousands of Oaklanders who weighed in on this process, on the creation of this plan. This came, through a long process, 3 years. And we want this to be used not just for our own transformative work, but anyone who wants to use it. So let's move on. Great, thank you. So just I'm going to breeze through this. There are 7 sections in the ECAP. I mentioned there are 40 actions. So each section has different numbers of actions. The largest section is transportation and land use, because that is where more than 60% of our local greenhouse gas emissions come from. And it's also where the majority of our air pollution comes from. There are a lot of actions related to EBCE in that section. Similarly, buildings and energy, material consumption and waste, you can go on. Then we have sections on adaptation, which is really where we hit kind of climate resilience and climate adaptation. We get into carbon sequestration. You can go to the next slide. And it seems like there's a delay on the slides here. There you go. So carbon removal is basically carbon sequestration. We're trying to use less technical terms. Port leadership, looking at, again, what the Port of Oakland is doing, and that section is very much leaning on, commitments and work that the port is already doing and has already made, and how we work together as partners. And then city leadership, looking at how we can basically lead by example and transform our own actions and activities. So let's move on. There are a lot of kind of what I think of as very cross-cutting themes in the ECAP. We were asked over and over as we were developing this plan why we don't have sector-specific reduction targets. We don't have a reduction target for the transportation sector and another target for buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason is that all of these affect each other dramatically. If we have a lot of success in one area, for example, if we're really successful at getting people out of their cars through safe, accessible, culturally sensitive, active transportation networks and public transportation, we're going to need to electrify fewer vehicles because there will be fewer vehicles on the road. That's just one of probably countless examples. And so because of that, that kind of relationship within the plan, we don't have sector specific targets. So the ways that I think of these cross-cutting themes are first and foremost, deep decarbonization. Oakland City Council did declare a climate emergency. That was in 2018. They made issued a climate emergency and declaration and just transition resolution. So this is an emergency. We do need to reduce our emissions as drastically and as rapidly as possible because we do have an ecological and a humanitarian crisis that is unfolding before our very eyes. So that plays out primarily in the buildings, land use, and transportation sectors and is all very interrelated. Resilience to climate change. That's looking at everything from, wealth building and green jobs, very related to this transition, to safety, health, security, and again, very related to that next point of deep equity, housing security, things like that. Circular economy is absolutely critical, and that plays out in a lot of different ways, especially material consumption. How can we build a circular economy that minimizes our use of stuff and strengthens the local economy? Carbon removal, I mentioned that. That's carbon sequestration, and then ongoing community engagement that just absolutely stretches across everything. Here we are speaking at a public meeting where there's a lot of community input. So all of these were major themes through the development of the ECAP, and they play out in the ECAP itself. We can go on to the next slide. I want to focus now on cross-cutting themes that particularly impact EBCE. And this is, how we think about clean and resilient energy. All elements of clean and resilient energy need to be seen as part of an integrated whole. I think I don't need to say this, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but what we have been seeing a critical need for is to move away from kind of the old model of energy efficiency is a goal unto itself. Building electrification is a critical goal unto itself, right? Vehicle electrification, same thing. Energy storage, same thing. None of these are going to be as effective as they need to be. I'll say unless they are seen as pieces of an integrated whole. So we need to be looking at a resilient grid, lower bills, healthier indoor and outdoor air, a deep decarbonization, of course. So integrating all these things together ensures that we don't miss opportunities to kind of win hearts and minds around these topics and get the message out around clean and resilient energy. Integrating these means that we're not missing opportunities. If you go into a building and you just focus on energy efficiency, you're going to miss massive opportunities, of course, for electrifying the building, for installing car chargers, for talking about energy storage, and on. You can, I'm sure, think of many different examples for how this plays out. But I really wanted to focus on this because this is something that we are really intent on in the city of Oakland right now, is kind of changing the narrative around energy, away from these kind of siloed goals and figuring out how we can best integrate all of our work so that it's more efficient, right? As a public agency, EBCE needs to be thinking about how to spend the least amount of money on achieving your goals. And we need to be thinking about, again, how we can get our messages out as quickly and seamlessly as possible and not miss opportunities there. So those actions that you see listed on the slide are across 3 different sections: TLUs, transportation, land use; B is buildings; and A stands for adaptation. So I see clean and resilient energy targets in several actions across at least 3 different sections in the ECAP, and all of these directly, of course, implicate East Bay Community Energy. And of course, EBCE staff were there all along the way as we were developing the ECAP. So let's move on. And I'm happy to, dive deeper into any of those actions if you want, because I know that some of them are maybe less obvious from the title than others, but JP did ask me to talk about the process of creating the plan. So I wanted to go a little bit into that. We worked with an equity facilitator team, as well as sort of a more traditional climate consultant on sort of the technical data crunching side of things. And as I have mentioned a couple times, deep community engagement process. That model of working with a dedicated equity facilitator, a team that is really from the community, who has deep, rich background and expertise in environmental justice and climate equity, as well as facilitation, community engagement, deep knowledge of the community. That was a model that we kind of pioneered, working, building on best practices from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, our own Department of Race and Equity, and lots of work that had already happened within the community in Oakland itself. The Oakland Climate Action Coalition, the East Oakland Neighborhoods Initiative. We built on a lot of incredible grassroots work for this. The equity facilitator was tasked with, again, leading the community engagement process, working directly with grassroots community organizations to ensure that they were deeply brought into the process, and working with the whole team to develop equity-based key performance indicators and recommendations. You can go to the next slide. The community engagement process itself, these are a couple of photos from one of the community workshops on top, and then one of our town hall meetings on the bottom, had a lot of different components to it. We did 8 different community workshops across the city. There were stakeholder meetings with different groups. There was pop-up engagement all over the place. We had a lot of online engagement and activity, including when we got to the point of having an advanced draft, actually posting that online using a portal where people could log in and literally write comments all over the plan, say, this is great, but you also need to focus on this, or this is terrible, it needs to be changed to that. There were so many different ways for people to engage. We also had a neighborhood leadership cohort that our equity facilitator team recruited and trained to do outreach in their own communities, to do door walking, and to advise from a community member point of view how these workshops needed to be run. And they led their own engagement in their neighborhoods, with their organizations, with their families. So we tried to kind of hit on every cylinder of how we can get out there, how we can get the message out there, and how we could draw people in to topics that sometimes are very complex, but at the same time so deeply impact everyone. So let's move on to the next slide. This entire process of developing the plan and of focusing on the equity, the equity that's built into this, was very focused on data also. So bringing in, grassroots voices, the voices of people who didn't have technical background, but have deeply, very important lived experiences, and looking at what does the data say about this. So here are just 2 of so many examples of data that we brought in, and how iterative this whole process was. Working with our equity facilitator, our technical consultant, our Department of Race and Equity, the community, going back over and over and over again to all of these different stakeholders, saying, did we do this right? Are there pieces that we left out? Or is there more data that we need to bring in? Again, I think that, vehicle electrification is a really great example of this. Diesel particulate matter obviously comes primarily from trucks and from freight. And that is a tremendous opportunity to not just reduce our climate impact, but specifically to reduce climate in the communities that can least afford yet more pollution and yet more health impacts. As well as, you know, looking at how does vehicle electrification impact economic security? We know that electric vehicles have a lower lifetime cost of ownership. And we know that building out a greater network of public electric vehicle chargers will enable more people to make the shift and will make EBCE in a better situation as more people are pulling from that clean electric grid. There's that kind of financial incentive, or not, I shouldn't say incentive, but yeah, it's of benefit. It's of long-term benefit to EBCE the faster that shift is made in the community to electric vehicles. So that's just one of so many examples that I could bring. But I do want to note that last bullet there, the Racial Equity Impact Assessment and Implementation Guide, is a companion document that our equity facilitator, led by Environmental Justice Solutions, authored. And that is the guide. It was adopted by council along with the ECAP. And that guide goes deeply into kind of action by action in the ECAP. How do we need to look at, you can go to the next slide, by the way. How do we need to look at the equity metrics for each action? Who are the frontline communities for each of those 40 actions in the ECAP? How do we identify more frontline communities? Because it is a long document and it's not exhaustive, because these things are always changing. This is a long process. It's a never-ending process to constantly, refine your work and identify frontline communities, identify the interventions that are available, that are realistic in the moment to implement, and then to constantly evaluate and go back and refine and improve and implement again and again. So the Racial Equity Impact Assessment is a guide to how do we do that iterative, ongoing implementation, again, in an equity-driven way. So it started with a preliminary equity screen, and that was the equity facilitator team's way of saying, yes, the actions in the ECAP are likely to be the best way of achieving our equity goals. And it then went on to, how do we do this action by action? And that document also goes into how do we make sure that we maintain strong community engagement and empower communities to really not just be part of this process, but to co-lead this process as we go through these next 10 years and end this decade, obviously, in a much, much stronger way than that in which we started it. If we go on to the next slide is one example from the Racial Equity Impact Assessment. This is part of the line from the second action in the building section. So this action, plan for existing buildings. I'm sorry, my 3-year-old just walked into the room. Planning for all existing buildings to be efficient and all electric by 2040. So with this action, we're really looking at not just electrifying all of our existing buildings. That is incredibly ambitious, but doing it in a way that is, again, not going to create disproportionate harm. Doing it in a way that is going to start with efficiency, going to start with indoor air quality, going to start with how do we do this alongside vehicle electrification, again, so we don't miss opportunities. How do we identify those who might be harmed if we do it the wrong way, and make sure that we therefore bring those people into the process of creating the interventions. So again, this is just one example, and this is not the entire action there. These are just a couple of lines, from the REA. We call it the REA. I definitely recommend that you check out that document because it's pretty incredible. Again, I want to stress it is not exhaustive. So that process of identifying frontline communities is a really critical one and is one that the REA does talk about how to do that. You can go to the next slide, which is, I think, the last one. Yeah. So again, thanks for bringing me here. Again, I really hope that the ECAP as well as the REA is of use to you all, and very excited to be a partner with EBCE on this work, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Shana. I think what we'll do is go first to the public, and then we'll have community member thoughts or comments. Looks like Alita has her hand up, and then Jessica, and then Jim.
Great. Yes, hold on one second. I am going to recognize Alita as soon as I can share this. Alita, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Mary Sutter. Alita Dupree for the record, she and her. Lots of good things. Need a clock here. And I don't have any issues with it. I think this is a pragmatic plan, aggressive as well, but it's pragmatic. We're not reinventing the wheel or trying to do things that are pie in the sky. It is a large amount of work to do, and I support it. I happen to live in an all-electric home and powered by renewable energy from the wind, and I would like to see that for other people. And I am a person in equity community, as I rent, and I actually share a place with another person. And I don't have a car, so I ride public transportation a lot. And so this is a way of amplifying it to the masses. Equity must not hold on to the things of the past, but it needs to include everyone in the improvements of the future. And I maintain to you that equity and its needs are very diverse. And I don't want us to be hidebound by strict definitions, such as race or income, because equity goes further than that. And assumptions made are often not shown to be as one might appear. So we have to take a broader sense of equity, and that the needs of equity are really everywhere. As I travel and stay in a number of different places and use a lot of different things, traversing different neighborhoods as a person of an equity community. And the Metropolitan Transportation Commission last week had some discussion and action in reframing their language and terminology away from communities' concern and into something. I think they are using the term equity priority communities. So equity indeed has to be a priority, but it has to remember many, many different groups, because marginalization can occur really to anybody. You know, anybody can become disabled. Anybody can become sick. Anybody can suffer a financial reversal. So I'm looking forward to getting this going, for having a cleaner and greener community. Equity includes me, and I'm looking forward to enjoying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Jessica, and then Jim.
Jessica, I am recognizing you for 3 minutes.
Hi, Jessica Tovar with East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And I want to echo what Shana has said in terms of how important it is to really start with communities that have been hit first and worse. And that really, if we're serious about equity, that means that these same communities that have been shut out of the clean energy economy or dumped on by dirty energy operations are where we need to start. And incentivizing and creating those clean energy jobs, you know, so that we can build our assets throughout the East Bay and city of Tracy, whether it's local solar, wind, battery storage, energy efficiency, whatever programs that we invest in. The resilience hubs that I spoke of earlier are very important so that we can actually have that infrastructure that in crisis can operate off, you know, off grid and be island, so that our communities have access to energy even in situations where there's power shutoffs or some kind of emergency. And that is where the savings, you know, and the price, we get rid of price volatility, because energy off the market, our bills always go up, they never come down. And until we can build out our local community with clean energy, that's where we're going to see true benefits for people who are renters, for folks who are disabled, unhoused, detained, formerly incarcerated. There's so many people who have been left out of benefits from all energy operations, even the dirty operations. And so that's where our health and our climate's health will be improved. And until we prioritize that, you know, things aren't really going to change. We can't be relying on this remote energy from far away and outsourcing those jobs, and taking somebody's word that the energy that's been transmitted from far away is actually clean, when oftentimes it's not. So I really urge folks to really, you know, deep dive and, you know, really represent, you know, get the voices that need to be at the table to inform, you know, really advancing equity in East Bay community energy, because that's where the just transition comes for people like me who have been harmed by dirty energy operations and environmental racism. So I just want to uplift that and the work that we do at the East Bay Clean Power Alliance and at the local clean energy has always been rooted in equity and environmental justice, and really transforming our energy system to something that works for us as opposed to actually harming us. Clean power to the people.
Thank you, Jessica. Jim?
Jim, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Yeah, and I have to unmute myself. Jim Lutz with, I'm on the Oakland Climate Action Coalition. I took over for Crystal from the Local Clean Energy Alliance. I want to thank Shana for doing a great job of explaining the ECAP and the REA. And I would like to stress again how useful the REA is and how key it is. I would highly recommend that East Bay Community Energy look at it, study it carefully for a guide or a template on how to do equity metrics. The REA is how for Oakland, how the ECAP is evaluated on metrics. I would also like to ask East Bay Community Energy to work with Oakland to support the elements in the ECAP, the ones that Shana touched on, that are related to energy or that East Bay Community Energy would have some useful impact on. And then I'd also like to ask East Bay Community Energy and to ask Shana to push Oakland as well, for East Bay Community Energy and Oakland to work together to lobby state and the PUC, because many of the regulations, the existing regulations, actually are slowing down the rollout of solar and storage, particularly for community resilience hubs. And I think having East Bay Community Energy working with Oakland to address those shortcomings and figure out what the best way to set up policies that support the quick and rapid rollout of solar and storage in the most equitable way for community resilience hubs for the people that are going to need it. And I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right, I see no other hands.
There's one more hand from Vaughn.
Vaughn, yep.
One second. Vaughn, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Okay, I unmuted. I was just going to bring up, in my reading, I came across a company called PosiGen that specifically targets low-income environments for putting in solar power as a homeowners. They're one of the few companies in the whole country that don't use the FICO score of the owner as a qualification for putting in solar power. It's PosiGen, POSIGEN. When they say about dealing with California, when they say they want to go to California to do jobs, they don't look for the Silicon Valley, they look for Compton. That's the attitude they have. And they've been very successful on a somewhat smaller scale, but successful. It might be the kind of thing if maybe the staff has already looked at this type of thing where they could look at it again. For somebody that's willing to go in and fund and set up for low income communities to set up solar specifically for them. That's their whole target of their apparatus. Also, the DOE has had several webinars in the last couple of weeks about Jennifer Grenholm from this the head on equity, getting more equity into renewable energies into the right people that need it the most. You might look on the DOE website and look at the recorded. They've had these in the last, like I said, in the last 2 weeks. There's been 2 webinars on it. So even the DOE at this stage of the game is looking into this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like Audrey raised her hand as well.
Yes, yes. I'm unmuting Audrey now.
Thank you. Audrey Chinose. I caucus with East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I live in Berkeley. I think this is really an amazing achievement, and it involves so much hard work and conflicting and potentially conflicting opinions and stakeholdings everywhere. And so I just wanted to ask Shana if just to give us an example of a concrete case where the stakeholders kind of clash equally on the subject of equity. And I noticed at the beginning of your presentation that you had a slide where you identified the Port of Oakland forklift driver, I think it was, as being on the frontline person. And so how would he, in terms of health, of course, his interests would align with communities that suffer from diesel pollution. But how would his company have any equity interest in this discussion of fairness with the communities that suffer from pollution? How would you balance such a conflict if it arose? I mean, your discussion is terrific and ECAP is, but it strikes me as being a little abstract. So if you could maybe elaborate on that. Thanks very much.
So Audrey, I'm going to kind of take prerogative of the chair here and move us over to the panelists rather than have an ongoing dialogue at this point. I mean, Shana, we can think about that and move forward, but given our time and the other things that we have on here. I do think it's probably a really interesting point. Perhaps one of our panelists will bring it up as well, but I think it gets us into an ongoing discussion that I don't think we're prepared to really get into at this point. So I will ask any of my CAC members if they have any thoughts or questions for Shana, and I see Anna Olivia. So Anna Olivia, please go forward.
Thank you, and thank you, Shana. It's awesome to see you. I was really honored to get to sit on the Community Advisory Committee for about a year and a half during the development of the ECAP, and just want to give a lot of respect to the staff in Oakland for how open-minded and thorough they were in reaching out as deeply into impacted communities as they did. I think it's easy to stick with kind of the usual suspects and say, we did our community outreach, like technically this happened. And while that path certainly would have been easier than what we did, it was really powerful to see how many people stepped up. And I guess I'm curious about some of the things that I saw be the most effective really were those teams that Shana was talking about, people in their communities getting trained to go knock on doors of their neighbors and talk about how do things impact you? What are your priorities? What's going, like setting up those neighborhood councils was fantastic. And many of those folks are still engaged in ongoing work. And so we've broadened the knowledge base and the buy-in of the community into these programs, which can only make them better and stronger. So I'm curious, thank you so much, Chair and Vice Chair, for the work that you're doing on bringing this kind of metric into EVCE. It's been something that many of us have been vocal and passionate about for some time. I'm curious what things that you think we're looking at bringing in, incorporating from this really illustrative process of what can be accomplished if we take the time and put the effort in to accomplish it.
So Anna Olivia, is that a question for myself and Jane when we're thinking about it, for JP as
I guess that would kind of be maybe JP or you and Jane, and just a lot of props towards Shana and her whole team, because that was awesome.
Yeah, well, I think that for us, and really one of the reasons we wanted to bring Shana in is to bring out and let this group know that as we take our next steps and talk internally in terms of equity metrics specific to some of the EVCE programs, that there's been a lot of work done already on some of this. And we want to build on that and not go back and reinvent and spend the time. I think that we don't have necessarily the resources or the time to do such an extensive effort as Oakland probably did and sounded like they did with this. And so we really wanted to bring this to people to make them aware of it before we actually had any discussion specific to EVCE. So I'm going to move on to Cynthia and then William.
Yes, I'm in the BART system, so hopefully a train will not go by while I'm here. What has been said before is community engagement, especially through a lens of equity, and I think that's very important as EBC goes forward, that we continue to work with the community on these, metrics, or on our metrics, and that we have some webinars or some opportunity for the most impacted communities to weigh in. Even though we have worked on the plan, I think it does need more community input. The other thing I would like to ask Shana is regarding the electrification aspect of cars, and I would also include buses. A lot of folks are not able to, or some folks are not able to purchase an electric car. So were there any proposals for public transit, more fuel buses and or electrification of the fleet, and also opportunities for free public transit. And I think I had one other, and I do want to say, I do want to emphasize a comment that Jessica made. The less we transport energy, in other words, the more that we're able to build out our local clean energy, wind, solar, renewable, with local jobs, obviously that will lessen the carbon footprint. But I'm interested in the public transit aspect for Shana. Thank you.
So Shana, do you have a quick answer to that one? Because I do see there's a reduced disparity in average bus frequency in this RIA.
There's a lot more than that. So a couple of quick points is that when I say vehicle electrification, I am talking about all vehicles. This is not just about cars. If it were just about cars, you would be missing a major equity component, which is that certain communities that tend to be more communities of color, lower income communities in the flatlands living along 880 in Oakland are far more harmed by that diesel particulate matter and related pollution coming from trucks. Right?
That's why I raised it. Yeah.
Yeah. So our goals around vehicle electrification are all vehicles. We are absolutely not stopping at cars. AC Transit is a national leader in moving toward zero emission vehicle buses. So we're very pleased to have them in our community. Obviously, BART is all electric, but I don't think BART is getting their electricity from EBCE. So that's out of my hands. But just, noting that we are doing our best to work with our public transit partners. And that's, again, why I mentioned trucks and freight and delivery and last mile delivery. All of these are part of that ecosystem of vehicle electrification. This is a semi-long-term strategy. I mentioned the ECAP goes to 2030, but at the same time that Council adopted the ECAP, Council also adopted a carbon neutrality target for 2045. You can't be a carbon neutral city if you have internal combustion engines on your roads, period, full stop. Fortunately, the governor, we also have a lot of, executive orders and other commitments in California looking at passenger vehicles, looking at buses, looking at trucks. So, we've got a lot of good partners in high or high-ish places helping us along this journey here. I also want to mention that there's a lot of work here going on outside of Oakland. Part of the reason that I mentioned EBCE being a great partner is that no city, no local government on its own can tackle climate change. it's impossible. So we have to be relying on our regional partners, our state partners. I put in the chat earlier that the ECAP includes an advocacy platform that spreads across all of the actions or all of the sections in the plan, recognizing that we need state, regional, federal, and private sector actions in all of these sectors. So we also really rely on incentives and rebate programs and things like that. The Clean Cars for All program is all about getting electric vehicles into the hands of low-income folks, focusing on frontline communities, what they call disadvantaged communities, geographically based, income based. So we're relying on all of those programs. But you know, the reality is that we have these dates that we need to be working towards. And so it's very much a both and situation that we're looking at here.
Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving. So William and then Monica.
Thank you so much, Chair Sutter. And I just want to, start off by saying I appreciate this opportunity to speak for the first time as a member of this committee. So really excited about that. I also wanted to say that Member Landry kind of stole my ideas. Well, not really steal, but I also was going to bring up public transit, and I was actually going to ask about EBC's involvement with BART electrification, but maybe not good, but I'm glad I got an answer there, because I know that out here in Tracy, we're working on developing the Valley Link train. And so that's something that, I was thinking about too, is how is that system going to be electrified going forward in the future? So that's just something I wanted to kind of just throw out there and just really get us thinking about, is how do we get all of these different public transit agencies to really get on board with electrification, and then definitely moving us towards, I think, not just moving so that everyone has an EV, but also how can we make sure that people who may not need to take public transit will want to take public transit. So that's definitely a focus of mine. Another thing too, I kind of wanted to ask was about, as we go into electrification, how are we being sustainable in when those appliances, expire? How are we being thoughtful in the recycling of those products? How are we being mindful and also the production too? Because a lot of carbon is produced or is made through the production of items and goods. So how are we also mitigating, as we move towards electrification, the carbon that's produced through that? And how can we, eventually get to a point where the electricity that's, fueling our factories or manufacturing centers are zero carbon too, to help reduce any carbon outputs through that. So I don't know if that's something that anyone, or whether you, Shana, are able to answer, or other folks on this call are, but I just wanted to really think about those impacts as well, because I'm thinking, we could talk about electricity generation, but there's so many other things that also produce carbon too. And I think the last thing also is, how can we also look at, as we go into electrification, getting those wires to avoid sparking the grasslands. I work a lot in the vegetation management side of state policy. So I'm aware of the issues that are going around with our state. We're going into a drought. And so how going forward can we reduce, standing lines and also incorporate things like vegetation management to ensure that we're, when the fires happen, we're reducing the carbon that's emitted through that as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak right now.
Great, thank you, William. And you brought up a host of issues that I'm not going to ask Shana to answer. I think though, as your time on the CAC, please, it sounds like there's there are definitely things that you're thinking about and involved in, and we need to start talking about those, and they may be beyond what is brought up for the board. So as you think of issues that the CAC needs to discuss, and at the end of this meeting, we talk about things to talk about next time, we can try and start biting off some of each one of those to see what we can do, because those
definitely. I know that those were a lot of questions, so I'm not expecting like full answers, but I know that just based on what you can answer through this PowerPoint, happy if there's not any answers, definitely things we as a committee can think about going forward too.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, given the time that we have less, we're going to be going over our 2 hour, given where we are now. I'm going to ask you to think about those and set it aside for now. And I'm going to move on to Monica.
I guess I can just skip my question. I'll just comment, thank you for the presentation, if you want to move on.
Okay. I am pushing us because I know that we have a
No, I get it. I get it.
and there's going to be questions on that one. Shayna, I very much appreciate you coming on. I do want to ask one question for myself, and I think that Audrey really touched on this. Is whenever you put together something like this, there's always two sides. There are people that can speak very forcefully about one thing versus the other. Was your facilitator the active kind of mediator between that? Do you have an approach that you found to work to reach consensus in terms of the document that you ended up with? Or maybe not consensus, but agree to disagree.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that in a plan like this that's so far reaching and has so many different pieces, so many stakeholders, such a big community. I don't think consensus is really possible. Our facilitator was really great in using what we called a democratic deliberative decision-making process in the town hall meetings that we had. So the beginning of the couple years of engagement were really around, let's hear from everybody and let's just kind of put it all out there. What is everybody saying? And there was definitely tallying of, what are people saying in different venues. But there was also just, let's hear it all. So, part of it was just hearing all of the different pieces that people were saying. Part of it was noting, is this coming from, the usual suspects, or is this coming from, communities that are being disproportionately impacted, and really paying extra attention there. Definitely, there were dot voting exercises, and so that was impactful, kind of counting those votes. And then the deliberative decision making came in the town hall meetings at the end. The town hall meetings were held after we had that, we called it sort of like a 70% draft, I think. And with those, we had people sitting at tables, really diving deeply into specific sections of the ECAP and asking questions with staff there. What does this mean? Why did you come up with this? Why was it phrased in this way? Or why is the proposed solution phrased in this way? And then providing feedback. So that's that deliberative decision making. Learning about it first, becoming more informed on the topic, and then providing input. Paying giving stipends for the neighborhood leaders. That was very important to the process. Providing food, making sure that the venues where we were asking people to come in and provide their expertise and their wisdom was as inclusive and accessible as possible. That was very important. And I do consider that part of the process of trying to get to consensus. So no, there wasn't complete consensus. Nobody, I don't think that there's anybody who said that at the end, this is 100% perfect the way I wanted it to be, but that's the messiness of it. Does that answer your question?
It does. I appreciate it. Because at some point, EBCE, we're going to be going through something. And so it's nice to know what worked for you guys. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this item and move us on to the next agenda item, which is C7. It's the discussion, it's internal discussion of our CAC chair, vice chair transition. And this came about because we have had a relatively small CAC for quite a while. And Jane and myself have a 2-year term for chair and vice chair. We are being officially termed out in July, which is when we typically hold our to see who wants to do and see who wants to do chair and vice chair, and people vote on that. we're trying to figure out a way to help the new community members kind of be part of the CAC a little longer. If, before they say, oh yeah, I want to be chair, I've been here all of 2 minutes, but so we're wondering if what we should do as a CAC is actually push out those voting for chair and vice chair of the CAC from July to either we're dark in August. We don't have a meeting in August. So we could push it out to September or maybe even October and so Jane and I would kind of stay on for 2 to 3 more months in our respective roles, and then we would have our voting. So that's what Jane and I were thinking about. I wanted to put it to the CAC because it's our committee. If we want to hold them in July to see how it's going, we certainly can. But I definitely understand why it would be a little bit difficult for some of the new folks to decide if they want to take that on. So, thoughts? And Olivia? And
wondering, because I'm new, I will ask some basic questions. So how many members are existing and how many members are new?
We have 6 existing, 5 new at this point, once next month or once Wednesday goes, and then we're going to have 2 more new alternates that are going to be coming on. Probably it's going to be a little longer from there. So we're going to have about half of the CAC is new.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So Anna Olivia and then Kate. So what happens, folks, if you can raise your hand, then I see who goes and then I call you in the order. Anna Olivia.
Thank you, Mary. Just to let folks know, the way that we chose how we were going to do like how long the terms were going to be and that kind of stuff is that we built it originally to mirror the transition with the board, so that when the boards got a new chair, that we would also get a new chair. And it seems like a wise decision to delay that transition. I'd like to really support that. It'll take folks longer than 1 more meeting to even understand the scope of what it is that we do. And people who are interested should have the opportunity to talk with y'all and understand what the time commitment is, and the energy and knowledge-based commitment, because you don't have to be a technical expert to be chair, but you do have to be willing to like suspend your own opinion sometimes and those kinds of things. So getting to talk with you two about that, I just really like to support that. I did 2 years. You guys are doing 2 years. Does that mean our people who are at 4 years are terming out in July?
We have 2 people terming out in July. And we've got 1 backup already. And then I need to work with Alex on that. So.
So we're gonna be doing more recruitment. Cool. All right. Thanks.
Yep. Kate, and then Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean, just it does seem that July is rather quick for that kind of transition. But I was also going to say that just getting familiar with everyone else. Usually it could be based on seniority, so I'm not quite sure yet who's who and who's been here for as long as, how long has everyone been? I guess if it's just 2-year terms, then no one else would have been any longer than that. But I'm just getting to know everyone, so it'd be hard to even know, even based on seniority or, if that's such a thing, if that could be the next thing to go by. My initial thought is an extension would be good, because I think it's, that's only 2 meetings away, and I would imagine that's fairly difficult to get up to speed by then.
Okay. Cynthia? then Monica?
Yes, I don't have any issue with it being extended. I have been on the committee for a while, as you know, and currently I don't have an interest in chairing because I'm working full time and I have other commitments. So, but I would like to stay on the committee, and we can talk about that offline. So, but yes, if you want to extend it to transition in the new members, I have no issue with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica?
Yeah, I support your recommendation to transition as well. Just remind me, Jane, does the co-chair automatically become the chair? No, and okay.
It's often
No.
set up that way, but not necessarily.
Sure. Yeah, I too have been here 4 years now and have no interest in being the chair. So most likely will be a new person. So I think giving them a little time makes sense.
Okay. Jane?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if we need a motion, Mary, if we wanted to do a motion. But I'm happy to put one forth. But I just to say on your point, Monica, I don't actually have the bandwidth to be chair. So that's not, you know, I'm not putting my name forth for that for the next time around. I've also I had my video off because I've got a 4-year-old who was very active during this call. So that just want to say that wouldn't be the case this time around.
Okay. I don't know that we need a motion. It sounded like everybody is kind of on board with this. It was an informational item. I think that if we want to make it a formal motion, we can do it next month. It's not set up for that now. But it sounds like people are willing to push it out to September or October. Maybe next month, what we'll do is say, hey, September is when we should vote in new people, or let's wait until October. So I'd like to have that discussion next month. It sounds like people are willing to do it. And in between then, the new folks can definitely reach out to me and or Jane, and we can talk to you about what it is that we do, what it takes to be chair or vice chair of this particular committee. So I appreciate that. Joel, did you have one more question? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have one more question. I think since the existing members don't have the interest at this point, it makes sense extend to later month of year. I'm just curious, just a question from process perspective. Do we need a board approval for this change, or is it basically the CAC can make the decision?
Yep, it's our committee decision.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks all. I appreciate from hearing of everybody on that. Let's move on to item C7. I'm sorry, C8, which is our draft budget review. This is an informational item. It's an informational item for the board. So we're going to be seeing this one more time in the future, I'm sure. So Nick, I don't know who's presenting for you all.
Yes, I will be presenting.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess first want to introduce myself. I think this is the first time that I will be seeing and meeting all of our new CAC members. My name is Nick Chassett. I am the Chief Executive Officer of East Bay Community Energy. And so welcome. It's great to have you all here. So I'm going to be walking through our draft budget that we have now presented to our Finance Committee. We're going to be presenting it on Wednesday to the board as an informational item, and then again to our Executive Committee in a week and a half, and then finally bringing it back to the CAC and then the board for approval in June. And we operate on a July to June fiscal cycle. And so, this is how we've done it in each year of operations. Have brought the budget forward in in May for discussion and June for action, so that we have it ratified and ready to go for the new fiscal year. First slide, please. So this year, we are proposing a budget that would find us operating at roughly a 3% margin on $500 million of sales and $482 million of expenses. That that compares generally well with last year. We are seeing an increase in sales and an increase in revenues, but also an increase in costs relative to the last fiscal year. The primary driver there is in April of this year, we have integrated 3 new communities, the cities of Tracy, Pleasanton, and Newark. And with our 3 new communities, as you wouldn't be surprised, they represent around an increase of 15% of total electricity. So, we're roughly in line there with the increase in both revenue and expenses. One thing I want to highlight from last year, and last year's proposed budget, and this is kind of an item that we'll get to, is last year we ended up experiencing a higher than expected net margin. So effectively kind of what constitutes a profit for us, largely driven by a deferral of some PCIA expenses. So all CCAs had seen large PCIA balances accrue in 2020. And as part of a settlement with that had not yet been paid, and as part of a settlement with the utilities at the Public Utilities Commission, there was an agreement to amortize these very large PCIA balances over a 3-year period. So instead of seeing a 3x increase in 2021 alone, the agreement was to amortize those increases. In our case, it was, we'll speak to it a little bit more, but it was $40 or so million, $50 million. That was being, instead of seeing that just come in 2021, it's being amortized over 2021, 2022, and 2023. The result is in this current fiscal year, we actually saw higher revenues than expected because we had forecast the PCIA to jump much higher in 2021 than it actually did. For this reason, we are using our revenue deferral account, our GASB 62 account, and we are deferring just over $20 million of revenue from this fiscal year to future fiscal years to help us pay for that increased PCIA that we expect to come in 2022 and 2023. Because our circumstances in this coming fiscal year were, I would say, better than we had expected earlier in the year, we're actually not expecting to draw down on the GASB revenue deferral account in this coming fiscal year. Instead, we are setting it aside for the following 2 fiscal years. With that, why don't we go to the next slide and we can jump into the specifics. Okay. As we think about the budget, I think first and foremost, the budget is what ties sort of the core elements of our value proposition, our discount, and our renewable content. And, these are both for our Bright Choice product. Based on our budget forecast, we are proposing no change to our value proposition, which means we intend to maintain our 1% discount, and no change to our renewable content, which means we intend to keep our Bright Choice power content set at 5% higher renewable level than PG&E. So those are, I would say, the two major highlights. We are also proposing an increase of just over $2 million, between $2 and $2.5 million to our local development budget, from 6.4 to the, trying to find the line item there, to 8.12. And so that's also due to, you know, I think our somewhat improved circumstances this coming year. One of the other major factors that we've been dealing with this fiscal year are much higher than expected uncollectibles. So, you know, there was a comment made earlier about, you know, customer utility debt, and we have certainly seen much higher than historical levels of customer non-payment. So customers who simply aren't able to pay all of the charges that they owe. And so we recognize those as uncollectibles. Typically, we expect about 0.5% of revenue to be uncollectible. That's been the historical trend. This last year, it's been more like 2.5%. For this next fiscal year, we are forecasting, you know, things to improve. So more customers being able to afford their bills. So for the first half of the fiscal year, so 2021, second half of 2021, first half of our fiscal year, we're forecasting a 2% uncollectibles, and then that will drop to 1.5% in this first 6 months of 2022. Overall, you know, I think some of the other major sort of factors to talk about are, we are seeing a increased energy price environment. You know, as many here have probably observed, the price spikes in Texas in February have, you know, coupled with the very severe drought environment in California, have led energy prices across the West in particular to remain persistently high, and they continue to remain persistently high. The reason why the drought is so important is California and the West generally are heavily reliant in the spring and summer on snow runoff to power hydroelectric dams. Given that we're experiencing much lower snowpack this year, we're seeing less water flow through those dams, which is producing less electricity, which in turn is meaning we're needing to burn more natural gas, which is more expensive than running a hydroelectric dam. I think when we think about our overhead operations, we are planning an increased staffing. Just as we continue to grow as an agency, we're bringing 3 new communities on, so we're bringing more staff on. We're also bringing, you know, some staff are coming in to support areas like our local programs, our energy procurement activities, and the build out of a local call center. And we are finally, I think the other thing just to mention is we are setting aside up to $2.5 million to assess whether or not we want to buy an office building for, you know, EBC's long-term office home. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a step back here and actually talk a little bit about the 2020-2021, so it's current fiscal year. As I mentioned, the deferral of the PCI did lead to higher revenues. Those higher revenues are largely being set into this GASB revenue deferral to help ensure that we are well positioned to maintain our value proposition in future fiscal years as we continue to pay for this amortized PCIA. And I think for the most part, you know, those are the main factors. When we set our, I will say, when we did set our uncollectibles at 2.5, we have seen slightly higher levels of uncollectibles, but that's largely a factor of higher electricity sales. So, you know, while it's around $800,000 in more uncollectibles than we forecast, we experienced $30 million in more revenue. So we actually ended up slightly below that 2.5% uncollectibles that we set at the beginning of the year. So, you know, it was quite a kind of a finger in the air guess whether 2.5, but it ends up that was actually pretty close to what we actually have seen. Next slide, please. So when we think about our budget revenues, some of the core assumptions are, maintaining our current levels of opt-outs for existing 12 communities. So it's roughly 3%. And we do assume a 5% opt-out rate for our 3 new communities. So far, we are experiencing lower opt-out rates than that. It's roughly 3% as well. But for conservative budgeting purposes, we assign our expected opt-out rate to be 5%. We are closing the Brilliant 100 rate at the end of this year. If you recall, that was an action the board took. And so we've had to make some assumptions around what our roughly 10% of customers who are on Brilliant 100 will do. Will they go to Bright Choice? Will they go to Brilliant 100? The effects here mostly have to do with revenue and sales, not really on net margin, because if you have a customer go to Bright Choice, their rates are going to be less expensive, but you have lower procurement costs because you don't have to buy as much renewable energy. If the customers go to Renewable 100, you have more revenue because they're paying more, but you also have to buy more renewable energy. We also are expecting some income from PG&E, particularly, specifically as it relates to our implementation of our disadvantaged community green tariff program, which is going to be our community solar program that we're going to start offering this coming fiscal year. That program is going to allow us to provide roughly 2,000 customers with an incremental 20% bill discount on top of the discounts they already have as care customers through a community solar project that we're going to go seek to build in the coming year or two. And so the CPUC is actually paying us for administrative and marketing, the administration and marketing of that program. And so we are forecasting around $500,000 of income to support implementation there. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are discontinuing Brilliant 100. So that is resulting in some reduction in our purchasing of carbon-free energy in 2022. We are assuming most of those customers are going to migrate to Bright Choice, though I think practically speaking, that it may end up being the opposite. I think as we continue to get feedback kind of in real time from cities like Hayward and Albany and Pleasanton that defaulted, I think each of them is considering some version of a community-wide opt-up to Renewable 100. So it may be that a significant number of these customers are actually on Renewable 100. But again, from a budget perspective, there's an offsetting revenue and cost effect. So no real impact on margins. Next slide, please. From a overhead cost perspective, this year we are reinstituting a cost of living adjustment that we did not offer a cost of living adjustment last year. And we are proposing a merit and promotion pool for staff. We also are proposing to hire 6 new team members, two staff to the local development team, 2 staff to the marketing team, 1 staff in the power resources team, and 1 staff in the technology team. For the rest, no significant changes in our expected spend in marketing, legal, policy, regulatory, other professional services. So the real increases are personnel related, but to adding headcount. Next slide, please. We are, when we think about our non-operating expenses, these are usually our local development expense, and then these other expenses. Typically, these other expenses have been pretty low. This year, we are allocating up to $2.5 million for what would be a down payment on an office building. I think very much uncertain whether or not we're going to pursue the purchase route, but we did want to maintain kind of that option. And so that's why we're including it in this year's budget. When we think about borrowing interest, these are largely, or not largely, these are all due to letters of credit. We do not have any outstanding debt on our books, but we do use letters of credit kind of as a more capital efficient way to post collateral at places like the California Independent System Operator, where we have significant collateral requirements. So those charges accrue to us. And then we also have, we do have an open $80 million credit facility. And so we do have to pay for the right to keep that facility going. And so our interest or borrowing interest sort of reflects those two effects. And then I'm going to get to local development, but that's going to be on its own slide. So why don't we go there next? Local development, please. So local development, I would say this is sort of our marquee initiative, and where we spend a tremendous amount of time as an agency, and certainly a lot of our discussion and time with the CAC centers around our local development budget. This year, and this can be a little bit of a busy slide because we talk about carry forward, and one of the things that we do find with local development is we earmark money in a given year. So last year we earmarked $6.34 million. Many of these dollars are going towards customer incentives or customer programs. And often those programs take time to implement. So you budget for them in one fiscal year and you encumber the funds. So the funds are actually held in an account, in our accounts, and they can't be used for anything else. They have to be used for these program areas, but we might not actually write a check for a customer incentive until the following year. Or we might not see a program get implemented where we might, where we're hiring a consultant to help us do outreach till the following year. So when we talk about carryovers, it's just, we're working on those projects, and it just takes time to actually write the checks and get them out the door to customers. So for this year, our proposed budget is, as I mentioned, just less than $2 million increase relative to last year's. So we're proposing 8.125 with an additional 382 in grants and credits that we have gained from, among other things, the Environmental Protection Agency and the California Energy Commission. So those are some projects that we're going to be working on with them, where we are going to be getting some grants. In this budget, the two major areas of expenditure are vehicle electrification and community investment. When we think about, actually, let me go to Adrian, can you go to the next slide? Okay, can you go back? Sorry. So let me, before I get in and walk through these, typically in this initial presentation we give to the board, we don't provide, the program by program, very detailed discussion of all of the local development programs. We're typically going through at a high level all of the budget because we want to get feedback across the board. And then next week at our executive committee meeting is when we'll very likely provide a more in-depth discussion of the program areas for local development. So, and then we'll also be providing that more in-depth presentation to the CAC and the board again in June. So just for your reference, there will be individual slides for each of these program areas that describe kind of in greater depth what the programs are. That was just not the plan for this coming meeting. But I will do my best to speak to them. So I'm going to first start, I'll start from the top. So energy efficiency, the primary work we're doing in this coming year in energy efficiency is continuing to operate a pay for performance, which is a program where we pay customers to install energy efficiency based on the energy savings that they actually incur, as opposed to based on the energy savings that a model tells us they might incur. And our other major activity is we're preparing to submit an application to the California Public Utilities Commission to administer energy efficiency dollars. We expect that will be several $millions a year, but it's also going to take it some time. So we don't expect that to actually start counting in this budget until the 2022-2023 fiscal year. In building electrification, our two major initiatives are one, continuing to provide incentives for businesses to install induction cooking in restaurants. As the restaurants industry is starting to come back, we think that there's significant opportunity to partner with restaurants, particularly small and medium, family-owned restaurants, to work with them to install induction cooktops as opposed to natural gas. It's also, I think, something we're really excited about, kind of commercial induction, because it's very visible to consumers. When you go into a restaurant and you might see someone cooking on induction instead of a flame, it's something that I think creates sort of a compelling story, and that will help encourage more people to move towards induction. And then the other large building electrification is a low income incentive program for building electrification measures. So that might be heat pump hot water heaters as one example of measures that we will be giving incentives to low income residents to install in their residence. In vehicle electrification, that is clearly our single largest budget area. The reason it's the largest budget area is because the majority of these funds are actually going to capital expenditures. Whereas in an energy efficiency program, we might provide a financial incentive that covers some portion of the cost of a measure, a heat pump hot water heater, an HVAC system. In transportation electrification, we're actually looking to invest in owning infrastructure itself. So this is a capital expense. And these are going to be assets that are going to sit on our books and actually generate revenue as people charge their vehicles on EBCE owned charging stations. Currently, we're working on 3 pilot sites, one in the city of downtown Oakland, adjacent to a lot of multi-unit dwellings, one in the city of Livermore, and a small project in the city of Piedmont. We're also, and this speaks to sort of the priorities that Shana mentioned around diesel fuel. We have, I think, well over $1 million set aside for our medium and heavy duty fleet electrification road mapping. So we're very actively working on developing a roadmap with a large number of regional stakeholders to determine what is the best path forward to electrify trucks at the port, trucks that are driving up and down the 80 corridor out to 580 to logistics hubs, both helping think through how do we electrify the fleets themselves, but also build out the charging infrastructure that's going to be necessary for those fleets to be able to move goods from the Port of Oakland north, south, and east. I'm going to jump to community investment because that's I would say the next and probably most significant area of local development. And community investment in this particular case really is our efforts around supporting customers' debt relief and trying to stop utility disconnections. So last meeting, I believe, we actually went through a more in-depth discussion of our debt relief or our last executive committee meeting, and I'm trying to recall if we provided the presentation here. I believe we did. No, did we not, Mary? JP? Annie? No?
No, we did not. Not to see.
We did not. Okay.
No.
We presented at the board meeting on our debt relief program. So this $1.5 million is largely going to customer outreach, community engagement, and supporting community-based organizations as we try to help customers sign up for the variety of debt relief programs that are available, from the arrearage management program, which is a program that allows customers who are on the care or fair rate and owe more than $500 to go onto a payment plan that if they can persist on for 12 months, they get their utility debt wiped out, to federal and state programs that are being administered by Alameda County and some of our cities that are providing direct payments to customers to help them catch up on their utility bills. So these dollars are going to go towards everything from direct mail and public service announcement type of outreach for customers to sign up for these programs, to direct grants to community-based organizations that are actually working in these communities and can help people sign up for these programs. Not specifically mentioned in this capital set aside, because from a budget standpoint, it's not a current fiscal year encumbrance, is the relation between this and debt relief. So what we did present, and what we're going to be bringing back to the board very likely in June, is the comprehensive debt relief program, which pairing this $1.5 million, it's really around outreach, with up to $10 million of debt forgiveness that's going to come from our uncollectibles that we've already booked. So that, is, recognize we're at 8 o'clock. That was my very fast walkthrough of the local development budget overview. Can we go to the next slide? I think this is the last one. So, these are very much forecast values, and there are certainly many risk factors that could make these things change, and could swing a $13-14 million net margin to something that is 10 million or more negative margin. And the primary risks are energy market risks. Those are the by far our largest set of expenses are our energy market expenses. And while we hedge ourselves significantly, we're not 100% hedged. So we would not be surprised at all to see a 10 or even 20% shift in energy expenses, one way or the other. Now we have seen prices increasing over the last number of months, so that price increases are to some degree reflected in our forecast, but it's certainly possible that those prices could continue to rise even further, and that is exacerbated by heat. Tends to be the exacerbating effect for prices. It also tends to drive your energy usage. So even if you think you're, say, 100% hedged for August, if that's based on certain assumptions around the heat and the load, if it is extremely hot and that could increase your load by 5, 10, 15% on a handful of days, those days where your load increases tend to be the very high priced days, and it is exorbitantly expensive to hedge yourself against that risk factor. So you end up having to just take market exposure, and that market exposure can end up costing millions or tens of millions of dollars in some occasions. PCIA also continues to be a risk factor because we are a split year fiscal year. We do not today know what our PCIA is going to be in 2022. We actually don't have a really firm sense of what the PCIA for 2022 is going to be until November of 2021. So, inherently a challenge to budget for that effect. Other risk factors are, do we see continued customer challenges in their ability to pay? So we are assuming a step down in uncollectibles over the course of the next 12 months from 2.5% to 1.5%. Certainly that may not manifest, and we may see higher levels of uncollectibles, which has a detrimental effect on our margins. And then there's opt-out risk. Certainly, again, customers may opt out at any time. In general, though, we don't foresee that being a high likelihood effect in the coming year. So with that, I think we're done. Adrian, do you want to just jump to the next slide just in case? I think that's it. Yep, that's it.
Great. Thank you, Nick. We're going to go to the public first for comments, and given the time and the fact that this will not be the last time we see this item, Adrian, can you please limit public comment to 2 minutes each?
Yes, I'm changing 2 minutes now.
Great, thank you. And go ahead, Adrian.
Okay, great. I'm going to recognize Alicia Dupree for 2 minutes. Hold on just 1 second. I'll say that. Alita, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Mary Sutter, members. Alita Dupree for the record, she and her. I think we have a good budget. EBCE is big business, force to be reckoned with. $500 million. That's what the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York is forecast to spend on electricity, running lots of subway trains and commuter rails at Grand Central Terminal. When I go to New York and ride subway trains, I'll be thinking about you. Certainly, I advocate for local development. I want more electrification for various reasons mentioned. I use an induction hot plate in my home and enjoy the benefits thereof. Wish I had one of those induction ranges with 4 or 5 burners on it. So I think that would be very good in restaurants and should be expanded. Definitely the vehicle charging, which should emphasize apartments and businesses, other places where people don't control their own real estate, and the trucking aspects have an important role as well, and buses, because for people who don't have cars, they can ride electric buses and participate. I am a bit concerned about the hedging. I mean, I'd be fine with having an open market exposure during the times of the year when demand is low and electricity is cheap. And I think we may have to augment our budget to allow for the possibility of severely high prices in the summer. I'd rather we over budget on that rather than under budget and find ourselves with a nasty surprise. So hedging is, I'd like to see us have less of an open position than we do, but I think we're onto something good. Thank you.
Yes. Vaughn, you are recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, this should be quick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Which one of the items in your slides are the reimbursement you pay to people that overproduce, you know, the rooftop type of thing? Is that part of your energy, or is that part of the efficiency in the program areas, or what? Or does it even show up on these charts?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, so NEM net metering does come through in the cost of energy line item.
Okay, thank you.
Jada is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Adrian. Hi, Jada Durmaz-Dogan with the Local Clean Energy Alliance and East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I have 2 questions about the budget. First one is about sponsorship. So what is the total budget for sponsorship? There's a budget item for marketing, outreach, and communications, but it doesn't go into the details about how much of it is for sponsorship. So I'm not asking about the total marketing budget, but I'm asking specifically about the sponsorship budget. And the second one, Nick, I know that you said there will be detailed info about the LDBP budget at the executive committee meeting, but I have a question about the California Electric Vehicle Incentive Program. In March, JP said this program will add $14.5 million in state-funded incentives in 2021. So has EBC gotten any money from the California Energy Commission for this program yet? And if so, how much of the amount listed under vehicle electrification is coming from CEC? So these are my two questions. First one, sponsorship, and the second one is Cal EVIP. Thank you.
Mary, would you like me to answer those questions now? Or?
Yeah, they seem pretty quick. So yes, please.
Let me answer the second question first, Jada, around EVIP. None of the EV budget in this year's local development is specifically from EVIP. Those funds are actually, our contribution to the EVIP was earmarked in last year's budget. So that's from last year's local development, will go towards incentives that will start being offered, I believe, in November or December. And those incentives are going to be administered by the California Energy Commission. So those will be available at the end of this year. So some of the money in our EV budget we are setting aside, or we are going to be in active dialogue with the California Energy Commission around trying to leverage additional grant dollars that they could bring, maybe a future EVIP project or something else. So we're actively looking for co-funding. On our sponsorship, gosh, I don't have the specific number in front of me. I think, for our local development, it's $100,000 for sponsorships and events. And those events could be conferences that we may want to sponsor. And I believe in marketing, it's another couple $100,000 for sponsorships of all kinds of events.
Thank you, Nick. Audrey?
Thank you. I also have two questions. One concern, I just want to be correct in understanding that the debt relief and COVID-19 expenditures listed in the program areas it seems to me a little odd that should be there, but that your community investment is in the function of outreach for CARE and FERA. I hope that's correct. And I guess that's one of my questions. Am I correct? And the other question is, what is the present CARE enrollment of EBCE and against its percentage? Sorry for going over.
All right. So to your first question about the budget for kind of CARE, FERA, I think our view is that AMP, CARE, FERA, Outreach, DAC, GT, these are all programs. These are programmatic efforts. And so we fund them out of our programs budget because it's a, fundamentally it's a customer acquisition project or program. We're trying to reach customers, get them to sign up for a program. So that's the rationale for funding it in local development as opposed to, say, marketing. In terms of our CARE, FERA enrollments, I don't have those numbers right in front of me, though. I do believe we have seen 20 to 30,000 person increase in our enrollment. So I believe pre-COVID we were around 100,000 and now we're around 130,000. Does that sound right, JP? Jump in at any time if you think I'm.
Yeah, I think I saw a figure of 117. I'm not sure if it's a little bit higher than that. And I think there was another question around the eligibility, like what's our enrollment based on the number of eligible CARE customers. We don't have the income data, so that is an income qualified program. So we don't have a measurement of how many eligible CARE customers are actually enrolled in the program.
Thank you. Let's move on to Jessica.
Hello, Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I do have a few questions about this budget. The first off the bat is when would we see a budget kind of like a budget breakdown. So like looking at this current budget, I can't tell where, like, for example, the medical baseline battery budget is, or where it would fall under these different program areas. And I would like to see a breakdown of that, because I think that discussion we had a couple months ago about how there would be 50 batteries given away to medical baseline customers, but there was like interest of like 500 or 500 and some medical baseline households that were deemed in need of a battery. So where that would fall, as an example, I want to see where other programs, like what the breakdown would be. And then other questions I have is like, similar to what was said, like sponsorships or COVID relief probably shouldn't be in the local development business plan fund. So I don't know why they would be here. I don't know what the MAS resources, I don't know if you just answered that, if I missed it, but I don't know what that stands for. So I'm just curious what that is, and I would like to see a detailed breakdown of the program areas within each area. Because I think that would be helpful to see where this money is actually going. First and foremost, our interest is that it goes to equity programs. So like not necessarily emphasizing like owners of cars, of EVs, or owners of, you know, their own home that they can solarize, but how other folks like renters, etc., can benefit, or community people, low-income people, and certainly recognizing that in this time of COVID, a lot of people are severely underemployed or no longer have their jobs. And so really emphasizing the equity investments. And just to highlight, Biden's infrastructure plan calls for 40% investments in equity in communities that have been historically harmed or left out of the clean energy economy. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to move us to our committee members for comments, questions. And I'll put it to you is to think about it as a budget shows the priorities. I think Nick brought out some of the different priorities that we have from that. And so, and also to remind everybody that, you know, this budget will be coming back to us. So if you have thoughts in terms of big picture priority things that you agree with or disagree with, that might be a good way to help EBCE choose to look at this budget and move forward. So Anna Olivia and then Monica.
My hand was still up from last time somehow. I have several questions, but I'll go last because I've been talking a lot.
Okay, Monica and then Jane.
Sorry, I was not prepared to talk yet, but thank you so much for the presentation on the draft budget. I had some very high level questions that relate more to kind of long-term where EBCE sees itself from a financial perspective. I think you mentioned that you were able to keep your value proposition both on the percent of clean portfolio that you'll maintain and a 1% discount to PG&E's rates. I guess that's great news, given that PCIA has been so crazy. But in terms of like in the next couple of years or 2 or 3 years, where do you see, well, where does EBCE see itself in terms of meeting its long-term financial requirements or building up its financial reserves? Will it be at a place where it has sufficient reserves to kind of weather some of those real big uncertainties, whether it's market price swings that could impact your portfolio costs or changes in PCIA or other stresses?
Yeah, you know, I think we see, you know, our current forecast that, you know, we take and calibrate against external models that are available. There are a number of consulting firms that have forecasts of the PCIA and PG&E's rates. I would say that our current models suggest that, you know, 3 to 5 years out, which is about as far as we can forecast, you know, we expect to, you know, achieve mid to high single digit margins. So, let's say, generally speaking, to be able to maintain, that value proposition and the both rates and green levels, you want to feel like, you're year in, year out going to be experiencing 3 to 6% profit margin, so that, in 1 year, if it dips to -2, it's going to come back to +5 the following year. And that's basically, I think what we view as sort of steady state. And so that's what our forecast shows us. So we feel very good about our continued ability to provide that core value proposition. In terms of our financial position, we have, call it, north of $150 million. And this was, I think, highlighted in our last treasurer's report. Jason, do you want to jump on? I don't have the numbers in front of me. These may not be on, but
yeah, no, I'm here. Can you repeat the question?
In our last treasurer's report, what was our days liquidity on hand? The publicly available version of that. I think it was at our 1 or 2 meetings ago.
Yeah, I don't have the specific number on hand, but it was around 150.
Okay, so if you think about around 150 on revenues, on expenses of 460, so that's roughly, that's roughly 4 months of liquidity on hand, and you pair that with an additional $80 million of $80 million accessible credit facility. I think we feel that is more than sufficient, to kind of weather market events, PCIA, in the near term. And it is one of the reasons why we're setting 20 million aside in our GASB account is, and not say allocating that incrementally towards reserves, is we actually want to have money that's specifically set aside for basically future PCIA volatility that we expect. Now, we expected that to happen this year, and the PCIA, because of energy market prices in particular, wasn't as high as we'd initially forecast.
And then I had one other question around your power supply cost. I think 2 things seem to contradict themselves, and I just could be wrong in the way I understand it. But on the one hand, you're increasing your load significantly, it seemed like, with the addition of Tracy. I don't remember, maybe it was Livermore as well. That to me would imply that your supply costs would go up. And I realize that you're phasing out your Brilliance 100 program, but yet your supply costs are decreasing significantly. And given where market prices are right now, that seemed like a little bit of a surprise to me. Do you have an explanation? Is it really just around Brilliance 100?
No. I mean, I think if you think about our sales, we're forecasting year over year, and a lot of this is related to Tracy. We're forecasting almost $100 million in higher sales, but we're forecasting $85 to $90 million in higher supply costs. So, some of that. So, our supply costs are going up significantly. At some of the sales forecasts, it's largely driven by Tracy and the 3 new communities rather. Some of the dampening effect is we do have some of our PPAs that have come online, and so those are providing those do provide some downward pressure on our energy supply costs as well. So yeah, those are the main factors.
Yeah, I would just look at it on a percentage basis as well. I mean, Nick, those numbers you referenced, the sales are increasing by about 25%, and cost of energy is about 23.5%. So they are pretty closely aligned, Monica.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Jane, then Joel.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, thank you to staff for preparing this and Nick for presenting. Look forward to seeing more on this budget as it unfolds. One question I have is when we can expect the detailed programmatic level budget for local development, and how we'll kind of structure opportunities to give feedback on that. That's one question. The 2 areas that I'd like to see more detail. One is on this the community engagement. You had mentioned that you intend to roll the 8.5 or 10 million from debt forgiveness into community engagement as debt forgiveness for ratepayers. We'd just like to understand a little bit more about that, because as it's described in your slide, as was kind of highlighted by the public comment as well, that the 1.5 that's there right now and earmarked for outreach seems a little bit vague. So we'd like to see a little more detail there. And then on vehicle electrification, just want to applaud you guys for taking a leadership role there. And really, I think that's just a critical area where EBCE is well positioned to have an impact. And it's a somewhat, particularly from the point of view of medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification, it's a somewhat intractable issue with many different stakeholders, from private sector to, public agencies and, those in communities that are surrounding those transportation corridors, as well as, small business owners that are fleet operators. So the logistics industry is, disparate in its stakeholders, and it's a difficult industry to, in which to kind of think about how this transition works. And it certainly affects our residents throughout our service area. So I want to thank you again for that leadership position. And I look forward to more details on the vehicle electrification and how it's going to be playing out over the coming months. So thank you.
Yes. So let me maybe speak to the question around the debt forgiveness. So we don't treat the utility debt that we're talking about was booked in this current fiscal year, not the coming fiscal year. And so we wouldn't actually point to if we're writing off debt or providing debt relief to a customer on a receivable from this current year, it doesn't actually hit our next year's books. It actually hits this year's books. So from a budget standpoint, we've actually already internalized those expenses as an uncollectible that we transition from an uncollectible to a write-off. Right now, in uncollectibles, we just haven't collected it. We may collect it, we may not. It's treated that way. At some point in time, you write those off and you say, we're not going to collect that. It's a write-off. And so when we think about COVID debt, that COVID debt has largely accrued during this current fiscal year. So if you think about the 2020, 2021, it's $10.7 million of uncollectibles. The write-offs that will be part of the debt relief will largely come from those uncollectibles. Whereas the 1.5 million in the budget, it's really more about the outreach and customer engagement to try to do everything from, we may have 120,000 customers who are on the Care Fair programs. There are certainly more customers who are eligible for those programs. Now, to JP's point, I can't tell you which customers are or are not because we don't have income data for our customers, but we do know, we've done analysis that tells us that in some census tracts where kind of what the average income levels are, you may only have 50% of customers signed up for Care Fair, but the census tract data tells you 80% should be eligible. So that gives you a good indicator that that's a census tract where you may have a lot of Care or Fair eligible customers who are not signed up. So the 1.5 million goes to everything from working with CBOs to go, engage with residents in those census tracts, to working to sign customers up to the AMP program. Governor Newsom just announced another utility debt relief, $2 billion for utility debt relief. We're yet to sort of see exactly how those dollars are going to flow, but there's going to be a lot of customer engagement and outreach. I think one of the lessons that we've internalized from a lot of the discussion around COVID vaccines is it's not as simple as saying, well, we have this, we're going to give you debt relief. You really have to go and engage. There might be distrust or not, not knowing EBCE as an entity. We say, well, if you just sign up for our program, you're going to save $600, $700, $800. That's not enough. You really have to go and partner with community-based organizations that have that credibility in those relationships. And so, we're also not going to be in a position where we go to a CBO and say, be our partner. We have to bring financial resources to the table. They have people who work there. And we need to be able to bring financial wherewithal to support them to do their jobs as they do this outreach. And I think in terms of the timing, I think we are going to present at the executive committee in a week and a half. The more detailed, I would expect that we're, in the past, if I recall, we have done sort of special sessions with the CAC ahead of the budget, just focused on local development. So I would think that's something that we, if there's interest in, we can support as well, kind of in early June.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Joel, did you have your hand up?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah, Nick, thanks for preparing and sharing the draft budget to us. And I have 3 questions. The first one is, it looks like the budget, it doesn't go with the calendar year. So my first question is, when does the budget, the financial year start for us? And the second question is, many businesses have seen or started to see the increase of commodities or raw material, and they have been starting to prepare the increase of even their price. I don't know if we have considered that, what kind of impact may have on the price which we purchase power from for the renewable powers. And the third one is, you mentioned that we will discontinue Brilliant 100. As a resident of Pleasanton, I know that that's our default choice. We are still relatively new to EBCE, and this is the first time I heard of that. So I'm wondering what's the marketing plan or communication on the change of the default choice.
So our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. So that's our fiscal year. To your second question, in the short run, we have not really seen inflation affect energy prices. At least I have not observed kind of an inflationary effect for natural gas. Natural gas in the short run tends to be the marginal fuel. So the price of gas drives the price of electricity. There have been a lot of other factors that have been impacting the price of gas, but not so much inflation. I think where we're going to see the effects of inflation are more in some of our projects that are coming online in 2 or 3 years. So project we're actively negotiating a handful of projects for batteries and for solar and wind. And I can tell you that inflation has definitely been part of the conversation we're having with these project companies, but these are for projects that will come online in 2022 or 2023. So hopefully it's a short-term inflationary effect, and it'll be a modest effect on those prices. If inflation, steel prices, an example, continue to be high for a prolonged period, I think we're going to see more of those projects be more expensive than we would otherwise have thought. And then your last question was Brilliant 100. I think that's we're having active dialogue with the city, each of the 3 cities where it's a default. And we're waiting for the cities to decide what they want to do. Do they want to change to Brilliant 100 or Renewable 100 or Bright Choice? And then, once that decision is made, we will start, kind of the customer outreach to share that information with consumers.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see no other hands on our end. I'm going to put in my kind of 2 cents. I really support the fewer professional services budget that I see and the increase in EBCE staff. I think it's great to have a lot of this brought internally. I also think the purchase of a building idea is interesting. I'll be interested in knowing how much of a hedge it is against future rates going up. And also it gives EBC, I think, an opportunity to really show the community how one can put a building together that is carbon neutral. I support moving more money to the community investment component of the local development business plans where possible. I'm not quite sure where it would come from, but it seems like that's an area that at least for one more year could perhaps benefit from a bit more dollars to it. And then long term, I really liked Monica's questions around, where do we see ourselves in the future? I really would love to see EBCE have the ability to have a much bigger difference in costs than PG&E. So right now we're 1% down. It would be great if we can put in play the opportunity to have Bright Choice be 2% less, or more, as some of these PPAs come on board and we don't have to hedge as much. If the power that we're actually bringing in and can do that, that would be great. I don't know enough about our future PPAs to know if that'll ever be possible, but that hits everybody. Everybody can then participate in that. So appreciate hearing about the budget. As Nick said, we will be seeing this again next month, and can have, most likely what'll happen is the CAC will then vote to support the budget as is, or if there are changes that we believe need to occur, then I will take that back to the board and they'll hear from the CAC next month on that. I'm going to move us on. Appreciate
Mary? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Anna Olivia. Yes, you were waiting very patiently. I appreciate that. Please go.
It's 8:36. I can email my questions and that'll be fine. And if anything is unresolved, we can cover it at the next meeting.
Oh, I appreciate that time. I know it's tough on the new folks. Our meetings I try to keep them to 2 hours, but as you can see, things go over at times. So I'm going to move us on to item C9, which is CAC member and staff announcements. And this is the time when if you have a request to place items on future agendas, I'd like to hear from you. And I'm going to write it down this time because I failed. Cynthia asked for something to be put on this month and I forgot about it. So that was on me. I will try and make sure that we get anything in there as requested. Seeing none, unless you want to put your hand up real fast.
My hand is up.
Still, all right, Anna Olivia, go. Sorry about that.
So for the last year, I spent a lot of COVID working on a project in Livermore. That was generously sponsored in part by EBCE. We created 28 units of supportive housing for chronically unhoused neighbors. And this week on Friday is the ribbon cutting at 10 a.m. So it will be online for most things. Supervisor Haggerty is flying in for the event and it's really exciting. So I'll send that link out to folks and just really want to give a big shout out to our community outreach team who's helped us figure out how to not have to run gas to those units and be able to have it be electrical, especially in the smaller tiny home space for the air quality for an already vulnerable health-wise community. It was really exciting to see that level of support. So that is on Friday. I encourage you to jump in and show your support by logging into that ribbon cutting. And thank you, EBCE.
Thank you, Anna Olivia. All right, now I still see no hands. Okay, I call us adjourned. Our next meeting is Monday, June 14th at 6 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.